Hello everyone, I'm Fola. Welcome to the third episode of the Diversifying Research Podcast. This is a podcast where we amplify the voices of underrepresented individuals who are either involved in or engage others in research. Over the course of this limited podcast series, we'll critically consider how to further include underrepresented communities in research. Today, we're joined by Lizzy, who is in her late teens and has been very involved in health research since the age of 11. Over the course of this episode, we'll learn why Lizzy got involved in health research, the specific activities she's been involved in, and what the benefits have been. And finally, she'll provide tips on how to engage young people in research and give advice to our young listeners on how they can get involved in health research. Hello, Lizzy. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Awesome. I'm fine, thank you. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Lizzy. I'm 18 and just finished school. I'm hopefully about to go off to uni and have been involved in research since I was about 11.
Oh, that's awesome. What are you hoping to study at university?
Hopefully I'm going to study medicine. We'll see with the current COVID pandemic if that will be the case.
Yeah, I hope it works out. So to start off with, could you tell us a bit about why you decided to engage in research, especially at such a young age?
I have had quite severe food allergies to the point that I've had anaphylaxis about 7 times, I think. And I'm allergic to dairy, eggs, nuts, milk, seafood, soya, sesame seeds. So the classic kind of chocolate, kind of ice cream, pizza with no cheese, jazz. Because of that, I was quite involved in the hospital and I had a PEG tube when I was younger. So it's kind of like a feeding tube, really. And I have a small scar on it as well from it. And so because of that, I, from a young age, was kind of quite interested in medicine and just generally research and kind of health and clinical trials. I never did one myself, but it was something that I was interested about after they kind of told me about it. And I had the opportunity to join the group. When I was 11, I was like, sure, why not? That's basically how I started.
That's really interesting. Which group did you join at that age?
I joined a young person's advisory group at Great Ormond Streat Hospital. It was quite a mix of ages because the youngest age was about 8 and the oldest could span up to about 21.
Okay. And what did that involve?
So, for example, we would have a day of about 4-6 hours and clinical researchers would come in. So, for example, we had about 3 or 4 to come in per day, but the meetings would only be every 2 or 3 months. Clinical researchers would come in, they would tell us about their trial, have a PowerPoint slide, they would come with information sheets, assent forms, which are essentially consent forms but for kids, and we would kind of go through the PowerPoint, see if we understood what they were talking about, read the information sheets, anything that seemed a bit odd or seemed a bit that we didn't really understand or didn't think someone who was a bit younger would understand. We would just let the clinical researcher know, would highlight points. Same for the assent form, if you feel like we didn't understand what was going on, or if we thought that there'd be ways that the consent form could be improved, then we would let them know.
Okay. And what do you think the benefit was of actually engaging with researchers and giving your feedback?
I feel like there were a few instances where it did quite help not significantly so, but it was always kind of about the small things that matter. I think one of the reasons why, so I kind of got involved into, because I'm relatively chatty, got involved into speaking at a few conferences, keynote speaking for a few kind of patient and partner conferences. So they're kind of trying to involve patients more within what kind of research, which makes sense because it's on the patients themselves. From that, they essentially highlighted the term of it's more making the patient more comfortable or the things that would be missed out on. So, for example, there would be blood tests and one of the researchers I remember came in and tried to schedule blood tests for, I think, about 1 p.m. every Tuesday and every other Tuesday and Thursday. And some of us have been like, wait, they have school. It's quite hard to get out of it. And so it would make the clinical trial much less appealing because it's obviously optional. So for people to do it, so then we managed to let the clinical researcher know. I feel like it would be those kind of little things that you would think that are relatively obvious sometimes, but maybe from a younger perspective in terms of our recent history. I mean, we recently went to school, half of us are in school, so we would have that as a major point in our brain, whereas maybe a clinical researcher might miss something like that out.
Yeah, and although you might think it might be a minor point, it can have such a massive impact in terms of just diversifying the amount of people that engage in the clinical research. So yeah, very valid point. And in terms of navigating research spaces, I know you're part of loads of young people's groups, but you're also part of groups that aren't specifically geared at young people. How have you found it navigating those spaces?
Yes, so I was part of the Great Ormond Streat YPEC that I talked about since I was 11, and then kind of recruited into the Young Persons Forum, also at Great Ormond Streat, which kind of focused more on the well-being of the hospital, well-being of the patients in the hospital, more like inpatients, and kind of talking about food, how we're going to develop Great Ormond Streat. So, for example, there's going to be a new Great Ormond Streat refurbishment, and we were kind of invited to help design it. So if there are paw prints leading up to Great Ormond Streat, the building on the pavement, that was inspired. I kind of gave that idea, so just so we know. So it would be small things like that and kind of just accommodating for patient care, really. That was great at Great Ormond Streat. So then when I got a call from Imperial, it was because I had applied for something else. I think it was, I can't really remember actually, but I applied for something else and Imperial, and I didn't get it. And then 2-3 months later, Imperial called me saying, so I got a call from Maria, who is great, and she is in charge of coordinating and kind of setting up the Young Persons Advisory Group. So she had called me about kind of helping to set it up and if I would kind of chair/co-facilitate the meetings and just generally helping, I don't know, advertising, setting up, helping with the demographic, like which social medias, maybe to advertise it on, maybe because things like that people my age aren't really, I mean, their main platform isn't really Twitter. Kind of doing examples like that, which would kind of help with the recruitment of the young persons group, since there was no young persons advisory group at Imperial before. So I found that really interesting to actually help set up. And it just kind of involved quite a few meetings. And she asked me how things were run before, previous things I've done, what kind of things people would be kind of looking for in terms of what they would expect, how to best welcome people. And that was basically most of my role in the setting up of the YPAG.
Yeah, that sounds like a really important role and it's had such a massive impact. I think it would be good if you spoke a little bit about what you found to be really good practice when it comes to engaging with young people, because some people might be listening to this podcast, they might be researchers and they want to engage young people, but they don't necessarily know how to go about it. So what would your recommendations be?
I think that it would probably be very good engaging widespread for schools. There are a lot of people in young person kind of advisory groups who are already kind of patients, which is good because it's good to have the diversity of having many different people experiencing different types of healthcare and kind of treatments that they receive and experiences. However, it's also good to get a larger group of recruitment, which usually aren't all patients or ex-patients, so that would be good to kind of widespread and advertise it more widely as not necessarily needing to have had the experience yourself, as just a general kind of, what do you think this is? And so more advertising to schools, colleges, sixth forms, universities, going around to youth centres. That would be really useful, I think, in terms of gaining more. I feel like there should be more of a social media presence, which there's not really, considering that many of the people, and as generations kind of continue, social media will get younger and younger. So I feel like that should be a platform that should be explored more. For example, you could pay to get Facebook or Instagram adverts up, depending on the budget you get as a clinical researcher. If you're trying to get more people, especially sponsored ads, they can tailor it to, I think, the demographic group that you're trying to aim for. So you can pay to get different adverts. I think that would be what I'm thinking of at the moment.
Those are some really good suggestions. And I imagine with all the fantastic experiences you've had, you've also seen research not being done particularly well. So any ideas of what you found hasn't worked particularly well and you think people should just stay clear of?
Anything that hasn't been done particularly well, I feel like it's been run pretty smoothly. There have been times where there might not have been as many people. However, I feel like that probably is also from the fact that, for example, the Imperial YPAG only started about a year ago really. So there hasn't been much time for advertising and the sort. I think other than that, it's been pretty self-smoothing, and we've had a decent amount of clinical researchers come in and also recruiting people. Also, it was very good in the sense of having a young person advisory group, so you could ask young people, 17 to 25 is the Imperial one, to kind of also help out in not random, but other workshops here and there, other things that we kind of need to do or need help with, which other clinical researchers, you can kind of make networks and get contacts and connect with other people.
That's really helpful. And I just want to touch on the point about just the emotional benefits that you found from being part of these groups, because in previous conversations we've had, you've spoken about how you've never met anyone with the same number of allergies that you have and severity of allergies as well. So on an emotional level, was it beneficial to interact with other young people that might have similar experiences to you within these youth groups?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, it's true. I've never met anyone with the same number of food allergies / severity of them, probably because I'm a bit of a random survivor of tons of allergies from when I was young. However, it had been really nice, I guess, to also emotionally connect with other people who, especially at the Great Ormond Street YPAG, when they were younger, because the kind of demographic from Imperial were more older. They tended to be, obviously they were older because the age group was a bit older. However, I think maybe the group that was, like the advertising was more to university students and people who were interested in healthcare, whereas the Great Ormond Street ones were more ex-patient focused, or just generally the group that the number of people tended to be more inpatients or ex-patients. Based on that, it was really good to kind of connect to people who had more experience in hospital, for example. Sometimes in school, it's just not really, it's not exactly the same in terms of like people understand. However, sometimes it's just kind of nice to talk to someone who kind of gets it or just has been in hospital a lot. It's just kind of nice to have that connection in a way, which just might not be otherwise found. Also being in a hospital environment, which I know some people are more kind of maybe more hesitant to because they've been inpatients or had bad experience in hospitals. But most patients, especially with long-term conditions, chronic conditions, are the ones in the groups. And so usually feel more comfortable from what I've seen really in hospital setting. And it's quite nice having a really welcoming, nice atmosphere that you're used to, because the meetings are usually set in hospitals, kind of in a room, basically take the whole basement, and then we have a nice big meeting there with tons of food and fruits and whatever, which is really nice. So it's kind of just a really nice atmosphere, and then we also get to talk. There's always like an hour breaks in between icebreaker games, and it's really nice to just also connect with people, just in general.
That sounds really, really nice. And I think you've moved us really nicely onto just demystifying certain aspects of engaging in health research, because there's some young people who I imagine are listening to this podcast in the same age range as you. They want to get involved in health research, but might be hesitant for various reasons. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about how you found it specifically as a young person. So firstly, can you speak a bit about how you balanced your schoolwork and being involved in health research? And I'm aware that you also have a part-time job. So how has it been?
So from working with kind of helping out in Imperial, YPAG and Great Ormond Street, it's actually not been too bad because it's been really manageable, to be honest, because saying that the meetings are only every few months, there's about 3 meetings a year, which isn't all that common at all. However, they are 4 to 6 hours long, which could be quite long and take up basically the whole day, but they do give you lots of notice. So if they give you at least, essentially at the start of the year, they give you the next 5 dates. So I basically just know maximum a year, but at least a few months in advance of the next meeting. So it doesn't really interfere with any plans since I've already scheduled that date off. And I think that's the same for basically the other people in the group. It's quite easy to schedule and make time and commit. So from that, I didn't find it hard juggling it with schoolwork. I recently, though, was involved in kind of as a partner in a study about COVID and young people's mental health in lockdown due to COVID and how it was affected. And I was actually involved in doing the interviews and I was trained. And this all kind of stemmed from being involved at YPAG for the Imperial. I was asked if I would like to help and be a partner as such, as it like a representative young person as a partner because of what I had done with YPAG, because they kind of knew me and I was relatively, reliable. And so I did have the opportunity to do that. And basically in the last few months of lockdown, I have been working with Imperial as a kind of contingent part-time-ish worker, basically helping, doing interviews, planning it. We're still also doing it, actually. We're still 4 months in, I think. And it's about a 2-year-long project. So that's been all right and been really interesting. And that was kind of an opportunity, again, from YPAG.
Yeah, okay. So are there any financial or non-financial incentives in place for you to do the work you do within health research?
Oh, yeah. So there can definitely be financial incentives in place because for Imperial specifically, with the involved NIHR guidelines, they pay £25 an hour, which is relatively quite encouraging, especially for people who are trying and seeing if they like research to kind of see if they want to help out in research in the first place. It's helpful to have that extra push of more incentive of why you would want to go into health research in the first place. And it's good in general as you can just get some extra money every now and then.
Yeah, that's good. £25 can definitely go a long way. I'm thinking about the non-financial incentives. Do you think you've gained a lot of transferable skills from being part of the YPAG? And can you name some of those skills if you have gained those?
Yes, I feel like I have gained more public speaking skills. Kind of saying this before about how I was going speeches and at talks for Great Ormond Street. And so I definitely gained public speaking skills. Also talking to a larger range of audience and adapting to different age range, different groups. So for example, in the YPAG at Great Ormond Street, I was sometimes around 8-year-olds while I was about 16. And we were talking about research together, which was kind of interesting considering we definitely would have different viewpoints and priorities. So it was really interesting and also like really a good learning ability in a way to kind of adapt to different situations, scenarios, different age ranges within people, really. So I thought that was really good. So essentially so far, being able to socialise, I guess, in that aspect. I also learned a lot about how the NHS works in the research cycle, which I guess hopefully if I do get into medicine would be useful if I decided to take a more research path. I did learn a lot about, as I said, the process, the many stages of implementation and the checks you need to go through, safeguarding, and learn about how important every step was in terms of, you need to get the approval and continue essentially through that, all the checks, all the safety nets, everything. And it did make me kind of value the NHS and generally everyone working under it more, just because of all the necessary changes and improvements and checks and just all the things, I don't know, that kind of makes all these clinical trials that are happening need so much thought and so much time dedicated to it. People, a lot of communicating between different specialties, essentially like different skills, different jobs. It's kind of amazing in a way to how it's all run and it's kind of what exists.
Yeah. It sounds like you gained a lot of exposure from those experiences. And just going back to the fact that you've applied to study medicine at university, Do you think being part of the YPAG helped inform your university application process?
I think it has. I think it would be quite different than other work experience CV things you could put, because I think it's more research-based, which many people don't necessarily have. I think it was good, and it is good on my CV in the sense of I really did learn a lot from it, and I did gain a lot of experience and general knowledge. I feel like it did further me personally, which is why I would say it was good for my CV, because I would be able to talk about it and say how it would reflect, which reflecting is a very important thing in medicine. And this is what I've been told from interviews and have learned myself, that reflecting is really important. And I think it's really important, essentially, to be able to understand and learn why things happen, talk about it later. It's a general theme that does come up naturally in the YPAG meetings about reflection and changing things and editing and making sure you do go back, and if there's a mistake, change it and make sure it never happens again. And it's the mentality that's kind of set, which I do think was and is valuable experience, which is why it does, I think, strengthen my medical application.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And finally, I would just like to ask, a lot of young people might think you need minimum requirements or minimum qualifications to get involved in these groups. Is that a myth or not?
Not at all. There is, you don't need anything to get into these groups, just basically you and hopefully a relatively hopeful and positive attitude to joining a new group, really, and being able and willing to talk about what you think. Just giving an opinion, that's really it. You don't really have to talk about anything regarding yourself anyways. Just talk about your opinion, literally what the first thing that pops into your mind, really. It's not very stressful, yeah, so, and very inclusive, so.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. So if you have learned a lot from Lizzy's experience and you are interested in getting involved in health research, then Google Imperial College Patient Experience Research Center, go onto the webpage, find their contact details, and you can just email someone such as Maria Pigeon. Her details will be online, and you can tell her you want to get involved in health research. You don't need to be a young person, and you can gain a lot of transferable skills like Lizzy, and also earn a bit of money on the side, which is also good. So we have come to the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode, Lizzy. I've learned a lot about youth engagement in health research from you, and I hope our listeners have as well. Please make sure you tune in to our next podcast episode, where I'll be interviewing Deshane Murray, who is a British Caribbean PhD student, on how he has navigated academia. Thank you.